Okay, so when we think about design systems, typically those design systems that we build are monolithic. And the monolithic design systems that we see when we work with our different partners and customers, as well inside the community, tend to compromise adoption in various ways. So the reason being is that we approach a design system the same way where we approach any other project, as a top-down centralized effort to build or to implement this thing that we were given as a product or as a feature. It creates challenges for adoption in several ways. Because again, this is a large thing with all of those components built in. Often there are consumers that already built a lot of the UI components they need, right? We are talking about other teams in wider organizations that already have live products in production. For some other teams, maybe they need components that the design system is lacking, and maybe that design system is not sufficient enough and not composable enough for them to take the features on the UI they've built and adapt to the standards of the design system. And we also see that often a lot of consumers are afraid to get locked into the design system team's roadmap, right? If there are any bugs or new features or enhancement requests on different APIs, we tend to see a lot of friction when it comes down to consumers wanting something, because they have bugs right now, or they have a feature request they need for them to move forward, and they are now waiting on some other team's roadmap. Moreover, collaboration tends to be harder, because if you have a centralized library, then the collaboration around it, it becomes like this guarded core in a way that you have to go through sometimes loops and hoops in order to get collaboration going. So if you want to suggest changes or introduce new functionalities or even fix an issue, you face some sort of bureaucracy. And our approach to, if we're thinking on a centralized effort as something that may compromise consumptions or adoption, if we try to break it down to independent components, maybe we can also solve this problem, because ultimately a design system, it comes to resolve many small problems in our UI UX consistency. Tokens, different patterns, grids, sizes, iconography, typography, and so on. And while our intention is to build a single solution to solve it all, maybe if we can look at each problem separately and solve each specific rule in an independent way using a specific component, we can essentially have like this component system that standardizes all of the different design rules and guidelines from the designer to achieve UI consistency. And moreover, if we focus on those components or those solutions being more composable, this means that consumers can focus on composing the rules or the components they need in order to standardize their UI. So in that regard, we don't want to couple our color palette to buttons, or we don't see the same problem for company logo as the same problem for getting fonts done correctly, right? Those are completely independent problems. A lot of them are of different scopes, and even within those different scopes, you can even break down problems even further. So instead of having this one monolithic thing, we're trying to look at the design system as how we can build a component system that allows other builders to compose on top of and take those rules as standards, as guides for their own implementation. So how does this look like in real life? I'm going to share from our example and how we are building a system of components that drives forward our UI UX consistency. So here I have an example of, a button as a component, a base theme as a component, another button which we'll touch later, and even paragraph as a component. So first of all, we'll touch the base UI component as an example. The problem of having a single button to rule them all is something that is very hard to solve. We can never know how many use cases or where that button is going to use. So we want to provide the most basic functionality, almost a headless button that is themable and customizable and composable in order to say, this is our base button. So whenever you want a button, take this as a base and compose things on top of it. So for example, you can take your theme, which can also be a component, right? So I can have all of my color schemes and fonts and everything in a single place, which then I can adopt in other projects. And this applies different primary colors and so on different elements. And with that, I can even have more stylized items, right? If we thought about the former button as the base input, maybe we have a CTA component, right? A button that can be primary, that can be secondary, that can be a link, that is essentially themed and accepts the styles from a theme. So it's no longer a headless component. This button essentially gets standardized by composed into a theme. So this way we decouple several problems here, right? We decouple the base functionality or accessibility, interactivity of what is a button. We decouple the theme itself. And then we also have a button with a specific set of behavior, like being a secondary button or a link button, for example. We can even do it, for typography. So, having paragraphs or headers or whatnot. And each of those components can be sorted in different scopes. So we can sort our design system and break down which components deal with our base UI implementation, all of our basic building blocks. Right, button, drawers, icons, some of our theming, all of our design elements, right? If we think about how we are essentially composing our front end, what are the basic building blocks of doing those things, right? Our different surfaces or more composed elements and so on. And essentially, this is how you can take this large monolithic thing and break it down to components. And there are several benefits for using those components. So first of all, we need to understand that each of these components is independently released and has a specific semantic version, meaning that when consumers use those components, they essentially, you only pick the components they want in their application. Moreover, updates come on each component. So instead of having a large release cycle for the entire design system, what we find is that we can have much more rapid releases on smaller parts of the design system of those components that only impact the specific areas where that component is being used by a specific team or in a specific app. Changes on components also become cheap, right? Our feedback loop becomes that much easier because if I can just iterate on the base theme and get feedback and do a change on the base theme alone, which is obviously then composed to other places, I get a far more efficient workflow. I don't have to go through and check everything else. I know that composability works for me. I can just change this one little thing. It also brings into play a unique case where you can also have some non-developers iterating with you on different things, right? A color schema is just a lot of hex numbers. So we can also have designers, if we have a component, it's just a very small component and I have all my log tokens here. A designer can quickly go into this token list and update a very specific color number and we can evaluate that and push that forward. And it makes our feedback loop become that much shorter. And moreover, the smaller and more concise components that we have, which then can be composed into larger composite components, have more streamlined and simple APIs. So instead of having very robust and wide APIs on each component, we have a more simplified set of APIs with more compositions, making it easier to use, easier to discover what it does, and less likely to break. And in a sense, once we build this component system, it makes it so we can unlock a flow for a gradual adoption model for those components. So we can break down an adoption of a large design system or large set of rules into small sprint size items that each team can decide on the priority or decide what they want to use. So it's not just a one size fits all where you have this massive thing you have to put into place and it changes how you do things. You can break down and build a roadmap for adoption. So you can look at one team and say, sorry, with your team, maybe it's easier to start getting the theme and the icons implemented, and then go ahead and grab the grid system, fonts, and different sizes. And only then at the end, you can start building, or using with the buttons, drop downs, footers, headers, and the more patterns that are part of that design system. Also, because we are building those independent components that are made to be composed together, often, right, one of the adoption issues that we discussed is, whether that design system has patterns for the problems that me as a consumer has. So, for example, if I'm in an organization where my team maintains a system with that is heavy on dashboards and data analytics, and the design system does not support or does not have dashboards, graphs, and other patterns, but it does have theme, sizes, grids, whatever, I can take those and only replace my color palettes or my grid systems and have my graph systems or dashboard systems to just maybe adhere or be more concise with the rest of the UI UX of the brand, of the overall brand. So this way I can compose my own unique solution that solves my own unique use case, and I don't really have to wait until the design system builds something similar. And with that, we can even enable this enterprise-wide component economy, which in a sense, it can strike a new balance between the product team autonomy that we want to drive, because this autonomy allows those product teams to move forward fast, and the consistency that we also need from working within, the design system team that needs all of the apps in the organization to have the same or at least a consistent UI UX experience. So from the top, right, we want to create a system that allows us to govern and understand which components are there to allow this collaboration and discoverability of all of these components. But then from the sides, we have two major types of stakeholders. We have the team that builds the design system, or at least maintains the UI UX consistency. They would push standards in form of components or independent components into that economy. Those standards can be far more than just the buttons, drop downs, tokens, and so on. They can also be templates for new components, build configurations, the entire development environment for building a new components, right? And just providing the building blocks, starting small with, the minimal amount of things they need to provide, and even grow horizontally to support more use cases. So, for example, if we ever decide that there is a need in a standard in our organization to build more graphs, maybe the design system can then create a new domain for the design system with just basic graph elements. And then on the other end, we have product teams that, from one hand, enjoy the composable building blocks that can be more easily adapted by themselves, by their applications, and build their concrete solutions. And on the other hand, also be able and be empowered to share their own composite components that solve concrete problems from their end. So if, for example, the design system team has a standard for how tables should look like, Maybe there's a specific product team that needs a table that allows sorting or drag and drop for columns or reordering of rows. And the design system team is not about to produce that because it's not on their roadmap. Then the specific product team can create their own domain of components and there create a composite components that solve the specific problem they have of having a table component that also enables more, drag and drop of columns, sorting around all of their rows and so on. And this way, instead of force feeding this a solution, the design system provides from the bottom a set of standards to build on top, and from the top a way to govern and understand what's going on and make sure that things remain standardized. And all of it only by breaking down everything to a component level, making sure that all components fit with one another, can be composed with one another, and so on. With this approach, we need always to remember that there is no such thing as a core component, right? All components are equally there, all components are equally composable. There is also the notion of implementing the single button to rule them all and be the only button for the organization is something that, while often we want, it's very hard to achieve. So if the design system provides building blocks for multiple types of buttons, then product teams can build the buttons they need. And also we can try and think about naming patterns that fit our business use case. So instead of arguing what is an atom, what is a molecule, what is an organism, and what can be composed of what, all components in a component economy are of the same size, and all components are meant to be composable. And this changes often how we think about the UI composability and what is possible for the larger whole. So before I wrap things up, if this is something that is interesting for you and this approach makes sense, then the main takeaway that I want you to take from this is, you can even forget about Bit for a second, is try and focus on adoption for design system and those elements on day one. Don't wait to have a robust system of components ready-made for everyone. Try and bring in value from a single standardized item. So if you already have a design system that you find how to get adoption to, try and simplify that, right? Wrap it and abstract away a lot of the complexities to a level of a very simple component that other teams can quickly adopt, right? Maybe your design system is already very modular, but it is hard to obtain because it's so vast. Try to boil it down to a specific value point like color palette, like the company logo, and so on. If you are starting from scratch, don't try and build everything at once. Choose one component, implement that component, and get that component used by one, maybe two teams, and start from there. Show the ROI and value, not only for the organization, but for the specific teams that use that. It will make it that much easier to start and build a more trustworthy relationship with different teams in the organization through the value that we provide. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to see about answering some of the questions that I see here on the chat. All right. So I see Pedro asked about the way to integrate Bit with Zeppelin and Figma. Currently, we don't have a specific integration with Zeppelin, but there is a component you can use with Figma to embed Figma design right alongside the component documentation pages. For teams that have their designers build or design independent components in Figma and align on documentation for them, you can embed those links and get a single environment where you see not only the component implementation and the rendering of it, but you can also see how it should look like and get a visual understanding of things. I see Julius asking about CDN capability in Bit Cloud. It's a different discussion I'm not going to jump into right now, but we do have a lot of new features around runtime integration, runtime deployment using Bit apps, and there are various ways we're looking into incorporate that into a Bit workflow. Kaylee, I hope I'm not butchering your name, is asking, when components of a design systems are distributed across code bases, do we need some sort of consistency on internal development standard, TypeScript version, framework version, etc.? The answer is yes. Generally, you want to make sure that everything fits to the same level of standards because you want to target those standards. You want to align on what makes sense for the larger organization to implement. One of the features that we have in Bit is called component development environment that provides this level of consistency. It also adds a couple more features like templates and so on. It's also possible to use other tools to achieve something like that, like Yeoman and other templatings. And there are also several teams that actually use Bit in order to componentize configuration for different tools and share them across repositories. But generally, if looking into Bit with that flow, component development environments are kind of the way to do. Let me see. Does Bit Dev provide any component development environment? A la Storybook. So Bit does provide a rendering mechanism for components. There are some differences with Storybook. In Bit, we mostly focus on the component flow itself, from templating all the way to versioning, publishing, and collaboration flows. You can use Storybook and Bit side by side, but if we are looking at a larger component ecosystem where you want to empower other teams to produce their own components and share to the same place as independent releases, then this is something we can look into Bit. Backend components, Michael Frankel asks, you can share components that are not only UI components in Bit. So if you are in Angular world, right, you can share ng modules that only has an ng service. In React world, you can share React hooks. You can even share utility functions. There's a video from last week about using Bit just for Express.js and Node.js driven development. Yoni Harris is asking, we are now in the process of thinking to use an open source design system library such as Bootstrap UI or Material UI. What are the pros and cons to use your own system? Small teams of 5. I guess the main pro is you get to start with a baseline. The cons, you don't want to get coupled by it. That's, tip of the tongue, but I want to jump into other questions. But generally, with that approach with Bit, whenever we use a third-party library or we work with a partner that is using Material UI, we'll always recommend taking that and wrapping, abstracting away all of the functionality that Material UI provides and build the specific components that you are looking to build. This means that you will abstract away a lot of the functionality Material UI provides for your specific things. It will also create this API barrier between your consuming application and Material UI. So if eventually you decide to leave Material UI and use a different platform, you can quickly do that without any coupling. Only on your design still will be coupled. David asks, how crucial do you think it is to get color palette naming tokens right from the beginning? I've been doing design system in a few companies now, and we've always struggled to find the color palettes. From how many colors to how many called, and making sure naming tokens is hard. We recently done a major overhaul internally on renaming a lot of tokens. We try. I don't know if there's a way to get it done right in the beginning. We try to be minimal with the amount of tokens we have, that's for sure. But even if you will not get everything right, I think the core thing to do get right is to make sure that you and the design team agree on that name 100%, and you know what that name means and where that name is being used. Because at the end of the day, if if you and the designer have the same name, they will use the same tokens right in Figma or whatever tool they use. So they suffer the same way you suffer when they change things and they want it to only affect one part of the app. So as long as you align on things 100%, your feedback loop, your iteration cycle will be shorter. I think I only have 2 minutes. I'll try and answer. All right, what about C# and Java? I bet we're going to get this question asked often. At the moment, Bit supports JavaScript and the ecosystem on top of JavaScript, so TypeScript, React, Angular, and so on. Bit is built to support additional programming languages. It is in our roadmap to introduce support for PHP and others. Basically, it's about building a dependency detector for other platforms. Currently, we don't know when we're going to get started with it, but if there is an open source community effort that is looking into adding support for Bit for additional languages, please let us know. We'll be more than happy to collaborate and see how we can assist. So if there are no other questions, thank you so much. And you can reach out to me and my team on Slack, GitHub, emails. We try to make ourselves available to questions and jump in on calls. Please remind on answering the short survey at the end. And oh, I see there's another question. Are there any examples of Bit being used with Gatsby.js? Actually, there is one. I don't have it right on with me. I'll send it as part of the answers for the rest of after this call. We do have examples and some partners that work with Bit and Gatsby, and they're able to share components that use Gatsby APIs. Anyway, I see that we are right on time. Thank you so much, and have a great day all. See ya.